New York doesn't sleep, yet a soul finds no peace. The city's brilliant neon lights reflected off the window pane of the 76th floor office, where Rowan Kingsley, the man Forbes had called a young genius, sat motionless. Beside his hand was the contract he had just signed worth over $1.2 billion. Another deal, another victory, another rung on the ladder of fame he had been persistently climbing for the past 15 years. But for some reason, after a soft knock on the door and a congratulatory word from his assistant, Rowan only gave a slight nod. His face showed no joy, nor any sign of pride. "You want to go to Tennessee," his assistant, Bryn, repeated after hearing the order to cancel the business flight. Rowan didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the city sky, as if searching for an old memory, something that had been dormant for too long, but tonight had suddenly reawakened. 2 hours later, a black SUV pulled up in a small town named Ashton, Tennessee. Rowan stepped out of the vehicle. He hadn't returned here since the day he left with an old cloth bag and a dream bigger than this town. The old roads were still the same. The old oak tree at the end of the street, the rusted supermarket sign, the small library where he used to sneak in to read business books every afternoon. And then Jesse's diner. The tiny diner where he used to work an extra 4 hours every evening to help his mother with money. The neon sign was faded, but it still flickered. And inside was the corner table where he used to sit for hours every weekend, scribbling silly business ideas on napkins. Rowan walked forward, his hand lightly touching the familiar doorknob. He had sworn he would never return to this place until he had everything. But now, in the middle of a cold October night, he came back with a strange sense of emptiness. The bell on the door chimed. The scent of slightly burnt coffee and fried grease hit his nose, heart-achingly familiar. The space inside was almost unchanged. The old wooden tables, the small counter in the corner, and, "Hi there, what can I get for you?" A gentle voice came from behind. Rowan turned his head, and he froze. The waitress in front of him, with her brown hair in a high bun, a simple uniform, and green eyes, had once been the radiant sunshine of all of Westwood High. Evie Wren, the girl who had won a scholarship to Yale, the one who had dreamed of doing great things. Now, she stood before him with eyes that no longer sparkled. Rowan felt like he forgot how to breathe for a few seconds. The girl in front of him, Evie Wren, had been the smartest in their class, and also the only one who had written in his yearbook, "I believe you'll make it. Never forget who you are." And now, here she was, standing before him with a tired look in her eyes and a worn-out order pad in her hand. "Excuse me, what can I get for you?" Evie repeated, tilting her head slightly, her voice still as gentle as a spring rain. But there was no hint of recognition in her eyes. Rowan swallowed hard. "Steak and black coffee," he replied, his voice noticeably deeper. "Just like you used to like." Evie paused. She looked up to get a better look. The yellow light of the diner reflected off his face. The features were familiar, but more angular and harder than before. Her chest tightened. "Rowan," she whispered. Rowan Kingsley. Rowan nodded slightly, trying to smile a smile that didn't belong to a billionaire, but to the boy from years ago who used to wrap her a sandwich after every late study session. Evie stood silently for a few seconds. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something, but then she just quietly bowed her head, flipped open her notepad, and wrote down steak, medium rare, black coffee, corner booth. "I'll bring it out in a few minutes," she said, then turned away so quickly that Rowan couldn't get a clear look at her expression. As she walked away, Rowan leaned back against the old wooden booth, his eyes following her every move. Each of Evie's steps was light, yet heavy with something unseen. She was no longer the girl who ran through the school hallways to make it to chemistry class on time. No longer the chirpy voice that talked about her dream of opening a non-profit educational company in New Orleans. Evie now had changed, and so had Rowan. A few minutes later, she returned. In her hands were a steaming plate of steak and a shimmering cup of black coffee. "Thank you," Rowan said. But Evie just nodded slightly, setting the tray down and turning to leave. "Evie." Rowan called out softly. She stopped, hesitating slightly. "I still have the postcard you gave me on graduation day," Rowan said, his eyes never leaving her. "Even if you think it's not important." Evie turned her head back, her eyes wide. Something, a memory, a touch of emotion or pain flashed through them very quickly. "Really, really? You wrote, 'If you ever get everything you want, come back here and prove that the world can still be kind.'" Evie was silent. Her eyes welled up slightly, but the corners of her lips curved into a sad smile. "It seems you did it." Rowan shook his head slowly. "I'm not so sure, because I came back, and I found you still here." A cold wind blew through a crack in the door. Outside, the streetlights flickered, like a reminder that not everyone who leaves town succeeds, and not everyone who stays does so because they want to. Rowan sat in silence, watching Evie walk away after her last words. That sentence, "It seems you did it," echoed in his head like a gentle irony. He didn't touch his food. The coffee was still hot, but it was tasteless. The lump in his throat refused to disappear. Evie returned a few minutes later, this time holding a coffee pot to offer a refill. She stood silently for a moment, then spoke first. "How long are you planning to stay in Ashton?" Rowan shrugged. "I don't know yet. Maybe a few days. Maybe longer. It depends." "Depends on what you're looking for here?" she asked, not looking at him, her gaze falling to the old tile floor, where every chipped tile recalled the footsteps of youth. "Depends on whether there's anything worth coming back to," Rowan said honestly. Evie let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Then you'll probably be leaving soon." Her answer made Rowan look directly at her. "Evie," he said, his voice as soft as the wind, "what happened to you?" Evie didn't reply. She held the coffee pot, poured more into his cup, and then just stood there, her hand trembling slightly. "You were the best in our class. You used to dream of becoming Secretary of Education. Yeah, she nodded slightly. Her voice choked. I used to. And then what? You shouldn't be here, not wearing a borrowed size uniform and working 12-hour days in a rundown diner. Evie lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer evasive. They were sharp, dark, and very tired. My father passed away when I was a sophomore at Yale. She began, slowly, without self-pity. A stroke. My mum fell apart, and then was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. My little brother was only in the 8th grade then. Rowan was speechless. He couldn't utter a single word. I came back. At first, I thought I'd just take one semester off, then another. Then the scholarship was withdrawn. And I just stayed. She shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant as if telling someone else's story. But Rowan saw it, her hand clenching the steel pot. I did all sorts of jobs, waitressing, cleaning, prep cook, sales, anything to get money for my mom to live, for my brother to stay in school. Rowan lowered his head. His heart felt like it was being squeezed. No one knows, Evie said with a faint laugh. Not even our old classmates. They think I turned down Yale to start a business. Sounds pretty impressive. Right, Evie? Rowan said softly. Don't pity me. She cut him off, still smiling. I don't need it. I'm doing fine. I have a job, a home to go to. And every time I see my mum smile when my brother gets an A, it feels worth it. Rowan didn't reply, but his eyes now held an undisguised ache. Evie took a step back, nodding slightly. I have to get back to the kitchen. My shift is almost over. And then she turned her back, leaving Rowan alone at the old corner table, the place where he had first drawn out his dreams. Now, that same spot was imprinted with the mark of a different dream, one that hadn't been defeated, but simply had never been allowed to begin. Rowan opened his wallet. Tucked between expensive metal cards was an old photograph, a picture of him and Evie at the senior prom. She was wearing a white dress, smiling brightly, holding up a sign that read, "Be a kind person before you become a successful one." He understood now Evie had always managed to do that. But was he truly successful? That night, Rowan returned to the most luxurious hotel in town, a place that, ironically, he himself had invested in renovating from the old administrative building years ago. Now, it was named Kingsley Inn, and he was the owner. The top-floor suite offered a panoramic view of the entire town of Ashton, the rows of houses with their faint lights, the quiet highway, and in the distance, the faded tile roof of Jesse's diner, from which he had emerged less than an hour ago. Rowan stood silently before the window, a glass of liquor in his hand, but he didn't drink. In his mind, everything was turned upside down. The billion-dollar contract signed this morning, the upcoming party in Manhattan, the congratulations, and the new round of funding. It all felt faint. Only one image remained sharp and clear, Evie standing in the kitchen, washing cups with her slender hands. Rowan sat down at the desk and opened his laptop. The screen displayed the logo of Kingsley Group, a conglomerate with over 18 subsidiary companies and 12,000 employees worldwide. He moved the cursor over a folder named Next Gen Futures, a project to support young talent that had been created but was frozen due to a lack of consensus from the board of shareholders. Rowan clicked it open again. In a sub-file, a note read, "Reserved only for those who were once deserving but were left behind." He quietly created a new branch, Evie Wren, Phoenix Code 01. Late that night, his assistant Bryn texted, asking, "Are you sure you want to cancel the meeting in London next week? Mr. Shaw is waiting for confirmation." Rowan simply replied, "Put everything on hold. I have something to do, something more important than numbers." The next morning, Rowan stopped by an old artisan print shop in town. The elderly owner recognized him, but Rowan just smiled faintly and handed him a small piece of paper. On it was written just one line: "Meet me tomorrow at 900 a.m., 72nd floor, Kingsley Group." The request was to print on black velvet paper, with metallic gold ink and raised lettering. No logo, no sender's name. "Is this an interview invitation card?" the old man asked, curious. Rowan nodded, but offered no further explanation. "Doesn't look like anyone who's ever printed here," the old man remarked. "I hope it's not like anyone who's ever been accepted either," Rowan replied, his eyes deep. That evening, after Jessie's diner closed, Evie stepped out into the parking lot. Amidst the layers of dust on her old car's windshield, a black envelope lay neatly under the wiper blade. She looked around, but saw no one. Opening the envelope, her hand trembled slightly. In the flickering light of a street lamp, the gold letters stood out clearly: Evie Wren. Meet me tomorrow at 900 a.m. 72nd floor, Kingsley Group. No sender's name, no phone number. But she knew exactly who had written it. Evie stood still for a long time, her hand clutching the envelope. The night wind blew through her thin blouse. Her eyes gazed toward the horizon, where glass buildings reflected a warm, golden light, like a world completely different from where she stood. She didn't know what she feared more: the opportunity she wasn't sure she deserved, or the fact that someone still remembered and believed in her. After everything, 9 a.m. Downtown Ashton was unusually bustling. Evie stood before the tallest glass building, Kingsley Tower, her hand clutching the black envelope in her coat pocket. She wore the most modest outfit she could find that wasn't stained with grease from the diner's kitchen. Her hair was tied back neatly, her cheeks slightly flushed from the cold wind and from nervousness. Inside, the lobby was paved with marble, with high ceilings and expensive abstract paintings lining the hallway. Nothing here belonged to her world. "Hello," she said softly to the receptionist, her voice almost a whisper. "I was invited to the 72nd floor." The receptionist nodded politely, scanned the invitation, and then smiled. "Please, Ms. Wren, the elevator is to your left. Someone is waiting for you upstairs. The 72nd floor." The elevator doors opened. A long corridor led to the main office. Automatic glass doors slid open silently, revealing a sight that left Evie stunned. The CEO's office of Kingsley Group was nearly as large as her entire apartment. High ceilings, glass walls overlooking the entire town of Ashton, and every piece of furniture was elegant yet subtle, not ostentatious, but powerful. And in the middle of the room, with his back to the window, was Rowan Kingsley. He stood up and walked closer, not in his usual cold, black suit. Today, he wore a simple white shirt, its sleeves rolled up, as if to erase the distance of power. Evie. His voice was low and gentle, with no hint of a CEO or a boss. Just an old friend welcoming someone very special. "Did you call me here for breakfast?" she said, half joking, half incredulous. Rowan chuckled. "No, not steak this time." He pointed to the chair opposite the large desk. On it was a grey folder, blank paper, and a Mont Blanc pen. "This is a contract." Evie furrowed her brow, sitting down slowly. "What kind of contract?" "The position of director for the Phoenix program, a project for educational support, scholarship advising, and career reintegration for talents whose paths have been interrupted. Headquarters here, 6-figure salary, full authority to coordinate the team." Evie looked at him, thinking he was joking. "I don't have a college degree. I've never managed anyone a day in my life. I don't even know how to use Excel well. I don't need someone who knows Excel. I need someone who understands the feeling of being knocked back to square one by life." Rowan pulled out another envelope and pushed it toward her. "Inside is a confirmation of funding for your mother's medical treatments, all of it, and a letter guaranteeing a full scholarship for your younger brother to any school he chooses." Evie opened her mouth but couldn't speak. She looked at him, her eyes beginning to well up. Why, she asked, why me? Rowan looked directly at her, without blinking. "Because you're the kindest person I've ever known, and I can't let a soul like that be drowned by circumstances. You don't need saving. You just need the right opportunity." Evie clenched her hands. A wave of emotion was caught in her throat, a mix of gratitude, confusion, doubt, and fear. "I'm not sure I can do this." "I am," Rowan said, without a second thought. Evie picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so much she couldn't sign her name. She looked at Rowan, as if searching for an anchor. "I'm not sure I deserve this." Rowan smiled, his gaze softening. "Opportunities aren't given to people because they're already worthy. The opportunity is what helps them become worthy. Just start." And for the first time in years, Evie signed her name for herself, not on a resignation form or a bill payment slip, but a signature for the future. A week after signing the contract, Evie stood before the mirror in her new office on the 43rd floor of Kingsley Tower. The name tag on her chest now clearly read Evie Wren, Director, Phoenix Initiative. She still wasn't used to it. A glass-topped desk, a new laptop, a bookshelf with dozens of books on educational administration, psychology, and a tiny potted plant someone had left with a note. Growth starts with the smallest things, like you. Evie smiled. The pen in her hand was no longer for taking food orders. It was now drafting a plan to select underprivileged, high-achieving students for the first round of Phoenix scholarships scheduled to launch right in the town of Ashton. But the first steps weren't easy. Evie taught herself everything from how to write a proper email, handle budgets, to planning training sessions. She took copious notes. Some nights, she stayed up until nearly dawn. "Don't try to be perfect," Rowan messaged in an internal email. "Just be sincere. You'll learn the rest." One weekend afternoon, Evie was invited to the main office where Rowan told her to stop by for a minute. She knocked lightly on the door, stepped inside, and froze. On the large screen in the middle of the room was a picture of her old house, the house she and her mother thought they would have to sell because they couldn't afford to fix the roof. "What is this?" she asked, her heart pounding. Rowan swiveled in his chair and raised a remote. Image after image appeared: a new roof, a rewired electrical system, a small garden with a white fence, and a front door painted light blue, her mother's favorite color. "I can't have the director of Phoenix worrying every time it rains," Rowan said, his voice light. Evie looked at him, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. "Rowan, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just keep up the good work. I just want you to know here, you're not alone." That evening, upon returning to her temporary apartment, Evie received a special package. Inside was a wood-carved plaque, a prototype produced by the woodworking vocational students from the Phoenix program. Engraved on it were the words, "From the forgotten places, we rebuild the light." Evie Wren, opening speech at the Southern Region Education Conference. Evie was speechless. She had never given a speech, never been quoted, but now she was the one bringing light to others. Late at night, Evie opened an old box where she once kept her scholarship acceptance letters, college admission letters, and a letter that was never sent. A handwritten letter addressed to Rowan himself in 2012. "If you become someone famous, don't forget those of us left behind. E.W." Now, that letter lay next to a new business card, not Rowan's, but her own. Evie Wren, the giver of opportunities. On Monday morning, as usual, Evie arrived at the office before anyone else. She turned on the lights, brewed a pot of coffee, checked her emails, and scheduled a meeting for the team in charge of the Appalachian Region Scholarship Program. A normal day until her phone rang. Ms. Evie Wren. A strange male voice, deep and clear. "My name is Beckett Royce. Perhaps you've heard of me." Evie shot up from her chair. "Beckett Royce, CEO of Royce Holdings, the biggest and most dangerous rival of Kingsley Group, a renowned businessman, brilliant but ruthless, a man who had driven 4 partners to bankruptcy in a single quarter, and had publicly called Rowan Kingsley a naive idealist in a suit. I'd like to invite you to lunch. There's something important to discuss." Evie hesitated. "This is a personal invitation. It doesn't represent any company," Beckett added. as if reading her mind. Just two ordinary people talking about the future. 12:30 p.m. Evie arrived at the restaurant. Beckett had chosen a place in the heart of downtown, luxurious yet discreet. When she walked in, he was already seated, neat in a navy blue suit, a smile just pleasant enough not to be cold. "Ms. Wren," he said, standing to shake her hand courteously. "You are truly impressive. Not many people could revive a dead project." "Thank you," Evie said, trying to remain calm. "But I don't think this is an innocent lunch invitation." Beckett let out a soft chuckle. "Clever. Good. I'll get straight to the point." He pushed a black leather portfolio toward her. "My offer. Director of Community Strategy for the Royce Foundation. Double the salary. Full control. An office in New York. You get to choose your own team. Freedom to develop your ideas. And a stake in the company if the program meets its KPIs in the first 2 years." Evie opened it, glancing over the contents. The numbers made her dizzy. Beckett continued slowly. "You have talent, but Kingsley Group will hold you back. They gave you a nice position, but they put you in someone else's shadow. Here, you'll be your own person. You won't owe anyone a thing." Evie put the document down and asked slowly, "The condition?" Beckett leaned forward. "Leave Kingsley Group. Bring some data with you, not classified information, just the strategic direction of the Phoenix project, so I can understand how they operate." "You want me to be a spy?" she asked, incredulous. "Not a spy," Beckett replied, his voice even. "Just someone who knows what she's worth." Evie stood up, her heart in turmoil. She said nothing. She just slowly folded the portfolio and left it on the table. "Don't answer right away," Beckett called after her. "This opportunity won't come twice. Think about your mother's future, your brother's, and your own." She walked away, his words still ringing in her ears. Freedom, power, owing nothing to anyone. That night, Evie sat in her rented apartment, looking out the window. On the table was Beckett's envelope. Next to it were the Phoenix wooden plaque and a handwritten note. "No matter which path you choose, you will always be the person I trust. Rowan." Evie gently closed her eyes. She had never stood between two such brilliant paths before. But she had also never felt so lost. That night, Evie's apartment sank into silence. No TV, no evening news broadcast, no soft jazz like on other days. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock, as if counting down to an irreversible decision. On the table, Beckett Royce's envelope still lay there, like a sleek, sleeping snake. Next to it was the Phoenix project file she had been working on until 1 a.m. the night before, covered in red ink notes, sticky tabs, and diagrams connecting each community. Evie paced back and forth in the room. She picked up the envelope, then put it down, opened it, then folded it again. Her heart pounded in her chest, not out of ambition, but out of fear. She thought of her mother struggling with chemotherapy every month, trying to hide her pain so as not to bother her daughter. She thought of Caleb, her younger brother, who had just been accepted into the technical academy they had both dreamed of, and the tuition was still a big question mark. She also thought of herself the person who once sat in a squalid kitchen rereading scholarship rejection letters, simply because she no longer had the financial means to attend. Beckett Royce wasn't wrong. She deserved more. She didn't owe Kingsley Group a thing. Rowan may have helped, but she was the one who worked tirelessly. She was the one who produced the results. But then, memories flooded back. One late afternoon, Rowan had quietly come to Jessie's diner, handing her the first file not with a superior air, but with a look of deep trust. Another time, when she was discouraged because the project team wasn't cooperating, it was Rowan who sat down, made 2 cups of coffee, and asked, "I don't need you to prove anything. I just need you to be yourself." Evie opened her laptop. She typed, "Decline Beckett Royce's offer," but then she deleted it. She typed again, "Accept, but only if no data disclosure is required." She deleted it again. She burst into tears. In the middle of the elegant room, Evie collapsed onto the floor, holding her head, tears falling uncontrollably. She felt torn in two, belief on one side, survival on the other. A dream once taken from her on one side, a chance to never be looked down upon again on the other. Finally, she took a pen and wrote 3 lines in her notebook. "If I choose Beckett, I can help Mom and Caleb immediately. If I stay, I'll lose the chance to be independent, to be the master of my own destiny. If I betray Rowan, will I still be me?" Evie closed the notebook. She knew, no matter what she chose, there was no going back. And she couldn't tell anyone, because sometimes the most painful battle is the one no one else can see. She opened her phone, about to text Rowan, "I need to see you," but her finger stopped over the send button. She deleted it, turned off her phone. This time, she had to decide for herself. Alone, no advice, no look of trust, just herself, and the choice. The next morning, Evie wore a white shirt and well-fitting grey trousers, not fancy, but neater than usual. She tied her hair in a high bun, applying a light touch of powder. Every movement was deliberate, confident, even if her heart was in turmoil. As she walked into Kingsley Tower, her heart pounded like a war drum. She didn't know what awaited her behind the doors of the 72nd floor. She only knew she had to speak, either the truth or lose herself. Rowan's office. Evie stood before the glass door, taking a deep breath. She knocked lightly. The door slid open. Rowan was standing with his back to her, hands in his pockets, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling window. The town of Ashton below was as small as a miniature map, but his eyes weren't there at that moment. He turned, met Evie's gaze. "You're early," he said. "I need to talk," she replied, her voice small. Rowan nodded, gesturing for her to sit, but not at the desk. They sat in the sofa area by the window where he usually received those he trusted. Silence fell for a few seconds. Evie didn't look him in the eye. Her fingers were intertwined. "Rowan," she began, hesitantly. I received an offer. Rowan listened, not interrupting. From Beckett Royce. The air grew noticeably heavy, but Rowan just gave a slight nod, as if he already knew. He wants me to work for the Royce Foundation, a big position, freedom, a high salary. The terms are very good. I figured, Rowan said, his eyes fixed on her. He never overlooks someone of value. Evie bit her lip. She didn't mention the part about the conditions of the exchange. She didn't have the courage yet. "And what are you planning to do?" Rowan asked, his voice devoid of blame, only an unsettling stillness. Evie looked up. Her eyes were now a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I haven't decided, but I need to know. Do I really have a place here, or am I just a product of your kindness?" Rowan was silent for a few seconds. Then he stood up, walked to his desk, and took out a thin file. He placed it in front of her. The cover was printed with bold letters, Phoenix Expansion Plan, nationwide. Below it was the line, Director in Charge, Evie Wren. "This is what I submitted to the board last week," Rowan said. "Before you got the call from Beckett." Evie opened it. The 30-page plan detailed every implementation region, the budget, and even a proposal to open a community training academy run by her. "I didn't create a position for you," Rowan continued. "I built an entire platform around what you've proven you can do." Evie sat in silence, her eyes starting to well up. "But if you still want to leave, I won't stop you," Rowan said slowly. "Just please remember, Beckett, Royce isn't recruiting you for your talent. He's recruiting you because of me." Evie stood up, her lips pressed tightly together. She wanted to tell the truth about the condition Beckett had given her, about the moral burden she was carrying. But she could only whisper, "I don't want to betray anyone, but I don't want to lose myself either." Rowan nodded, and for the first time, his eyes seemed to mist over slightly. "Then don't choose because of me, and don't refuse out of a sense of debt. Choose for the person you see when you look in the mirror." Evie walked out of the office, her heart heavy, but there was a light in her eyes. For the first time, she felt truly trusted, not out of pity, but for her abilities. That evening, a light rain fell over Ashton. Evie sat alone in her small apartment, the desk lamp illuminating her tired but resolute face. In front of her were two files. One bore the Royce Holdings logo. The last page was an unsigned contract with a section titled Mandatory Information Confidentiality. The other was the Phoenix Expansion Plan with a handwritten note from Rowan on the first page. "Wherever you go, remember you once changed someone's life." Evie picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed Beckett Royce's number. "Congratulations," he said as soon as he heard her voice. "I knew you were a smart woman." Evie took a deep breath. "I'm calling to decline." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. "Are you sure I don't think you can live on the salary Kingsley pays for much longer?" "Maybe," Evie replied, her voice low but clear. "But at least I can still look myself in the mirror every morning." She hung up, her hand still shaking. but the fear in her heart was gone. A strange feeling washed over her, not victory, not gloating, but release. No more weighing how much she was worth. No more being trapped in a sense of debt or forced gratitude. There was only one thing left. The choice was hers. The next morning, Evie returned to the office. She walked through the hallway as usual, but this time each step had weight. She was no longer someone trying out. She was Evie Wren, the one who decided her own path. Rowan's office door was already open. He was reviewing a document. Evie knocked lightly and walked in, without waiting for an invitation. I turned Beckett down. Rowan looked up. He didn't smile right away. He just looked at her, for a long time. "I know," he said. Evie frowned, surprised. "He called me after you hung up," Rowan said softly, "just to make sure you hadn't changed your mind." "And what did you say?" Rowan smiled a real smile this time. "I just said thank you for giving her the chance to choose." Evie sat down in the familiar chair opposite Rowan, looking around the office. Everything was the same, but something in the air had changed. She was no longer the lucky waitress who got a helping hand. She was no longer the one who needed saving. She was the person who had faced an invitation from the darkness and refused it, not for anyone else, but because she saw her own true value. A month later, Evie stepped onto the stage at the Southeast U.S. Education Leadership Forum, where Kingsley Group officially announced the expansion of the Phoenix program. She wasn't wearing an expensive suit. She was still herself, a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, her hair in a neat bun, a presentation filled with her own handwritten notes. But her voice was firm, full of confidence. "We don't just grant scholarships. We don't just open training classes. We give back to the people who seem to have been left behind the power to reclaim their lives, because I was once one of them." The entire auditorium was dead silent. No one knew who she was before she stepped on stage, but now no one could forget her. When Evie stepped down from the podium, a crowd of people approached her, shaking her hand, asking for her contact information. A principal from New Orleans wanted to apply her model to a local boarding school. A social investor asked about the Phoenix Community Fund. She answered each person not flustered, not awkwardly, because for the first time she wasn't just living in an opportunity, she was creating it for others. Back at the office, her team had printed hundreds of scholarship application forms. Evie walked around the desks, stopping at the desk of a young new employee. "I used to be a waitress, you know," Evie said, half joking, half serious. "But now I coordinate an education network across 5 states. The employee laughed shyly. "I know. I read about you. You're the reason I applied here." Evie stood still for a few seconds. Her eyes reddened slightly. Not from fatigue, but from emotion. She never expected that by standing firm for herself, she had become a role model for others. That evening, Rowan knocked on her office door. He wasn't carrying files, just a box of pizza and 2 cans of soda. This is how you celebrate when you don't want to make the news, he said. They sat and ate right on the floor, surrounded by unfinished project plans. "I thought you would choose Beckett," Rowan admitted, "not because you're weak, but because I know the price of survival." Evie nodded slowly. "There was a time I thought I would too," she replied. "But then I realized I had been living in survival mode for too long. It was time to live for a bigger belief." As Rowan was leaving, he stood at the door and turned back. "You know, maybe the person who changed Phoenix wasn't me. It was you." Evie smiled. She didn't reply. She just looked at him and then out the window, where the lights of Ashton glowed in the night like a soft greeting. From an old diner where she once sweated in exhaustion, to a high-rise office where hundreds of decisions were signed every day, Evie had walked a journey that didn't require erasing her past, only standing tall in the present. And the road ahead, though still challenging, was no longer lonely. 3 months after the launch of the Phoenix Initiative, Evie returned to where it all began, Jesse's diner. She walked into the old diner in a long coat, her hair falling softly down her back. No one recognized her as the director who had spoken before hundreds of education leaders. She sat down at the same familiar corner booth where Rowan had once sat, ordering steak and black coffee, where she had once served, where she had once rested her tired head after a 12-hour shift. A young waitress approached. "What can I get for you?" Evie smiled. "I'll have a black coffee and a chance to tell a story." She left a small envelope on the table. Inside was a special Phoenix scholarship for an employee working at Jesse's diner, nominated by their colleagues. It included tuition, living expenses, and career training opportunities. No grades required, no list of achievements, just a true story and a dream that hadn't yet had a chance to bloom. That night, Evie left the diner, walking down the small, windy street, her heart light. She wasn't the richest, the most famous, or the most powerful, but she knew she had become the person her 17-year-old self had hoped to be. A few days later, Rowan received a hand-delivered package. Inside was the old apron from Jesse's diner, the one Evie used to wear, now folded neatly, clean, with a handwritten note attached. "No one needs to be saved. They just need to be seen." Evie. After reading it, Rowan sat in silence by the window for a long time. Then he smiled, not the smile of a victor, but of someone who had walked through darkness and finally had seen the light in another person. Some people appear in our lives not to change the world, but to remind us that we deserve to live a meaningful life. Evie Wren was not just a survivor. She was proof that belief, when put in the right place, can change an entire destiny.